Part 1. The Mediterranean sun beat down mercilessly on the American airbase in Tarquinia, Italy, as Captain João da Silva walked across the tarmac toward his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It was March 1945, and the Brazilian Expeditionary Force's 1st Fighter Squadron had been operating in the Italian theater for nearly 6 months. The war in Europe was approaching its final, desperate phase, and every mission counted. João was 26 years old, born and raised in São Paulo, the son of a coffee merchant who had opposed his decision to join the military. But when Brazil declared war on the Axis powers in 1942, something stirred in João's chest, a need to prove himself, to show that Brazilians could stand alongside the Americans, British, and other Allied forces as equals. He had trained for 2 years, first in Brazil, then in the United States, before finally arriving in Italy with the 1st Fighter Group. The morning briefing had been tense. Intelligence reported a large formation of German fighters operating over the Po Valley, escorting Luftwaffe bombers attempting to disrupt Allied supply lines. The mission was straightforward: intercept and destroy. But as João approached his aircraft, he noticed the usual group of American ground crew members standing near the engine, cowling, shaking their heads. "Hey, Brazilian," called out Sergeant Miller, a stocky mechanic from Oklahoma with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. "You sure you want to take that bird up today?" João stopped, his leather flight jacket creaking as he turned. "What's the problem, Miller?" The sergeant gestured toward the P-47's massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. "That power plant came from a salvage depot. It was pulled from a bird that went down last month near Casino, officially classified as damaged beyond standard repair. We rebuilt it, sure, but..." He trailed off, exchanging glances with the other mechanics. "But what?" João asked, his Portuguese accent softening the English words. "But it's junk, Captain," another mechanic chimed in, a younger man named Roberts. "That engine's been through hell. Compression's uneven, oil consumption's high, and she runs about 50 degrees hotter than spec. Honestly, sir, you'd be better off taking one of the reserve aircraft." João walked closer to the aircraft, running his hand along the olive-drab fuselage. His P-47, which he'd nicknamed Senta a Pua, a Brazilian expression roughly meaning "give them hell," had been his trusted mount for 43 missions. The aircraft itself was sound, but 3 days ago the original engine had suffered catastrophic failure during a strafing run. The replacement had arrived yesterday from a depot in Naples, and the ground crew had worked through the night installing it. "How long until we need to scramble?" João asked. Miller checked his watch. 30 minutes, maybe less. "And the reserve aircraft?" "Being prepped for Lieutenant Anderson. He's got seniority." João smiled, though there was no humor in it. Seniority. Always seniority. The Americans didn't say it outright, but he'd felt it since arriving. The subtle suggestions that the Brazilian pilots were less experienced, less capable. Oh, they were polite about it. They called the Brazilians allies and partners, but when it came to the best aircraft, the prime missions, the recognition, those went to the Americans first. "I'll fly with what I have," João said firmly. Miller sighed. "Captain, I'm telling you that engine is unreliable. You get into a dogfight, push it hard, and that thing might quit on you at the worst possible moment." "Then I won't push it hard," João replied, though even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. In aerial combat, you pushed everything to its absolute limit or you died. There was no middle ground at 20,000 feet with German fighters on your tail. Robert stepped forward, his young face earnest. "Sir, we're not trying to disrespect you. We just don't want to see you go down because of faulty equipment." João softened slightly. He knew these men meant well. They worked brutal hours keeping the fighters airborne, often with inadequate parts and supplies. "I understand, Roberts. I do. But this is my aircraft, and I trust you did your best with what you had. That's good enough for me." The mechanics exchanged glances, and Miller finally shrugged. "Your funeral, Captain. We'll keep monitoring from the ground. Any problems, you abort immediately." "Understood?" "Understood," João lied again. 20 minutes later, João sat in the cockpit running through his pre-flight checks. The instrument panel glowed in the dim light. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, fuel gauge, oil pressure, cylinder head temperature. Everything looked normal, or as normal as it could given the circumstances. He primed the engine, checked the magnetos, and signaled to the ground crew. The big radial engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life with a sound like tearing canvas. Immediately, Joe noticed the vibration, a subtle shudder that ran through the airframe, different from the usual smooth rumble of the R2800. The cylinder head temperature gauge climbed faster than normal, and the oil pressure fluctuated slightly. Miller had been right. This engine was troubled. But Joe had flown troubled aircraft before. During training in the United States, he'd nursed a P-40 with a damaged propeller back to base. Over the Brazilian jungle, he'd practiced emergency procedures until they were second nature. He knew his aircraft, knew its limits, and more importantly, he knew his own. The radio crackled to life. All Jambok flights, this is Tower. You are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. Jambok was the call sign for the Brazilian 1st Fighter Squadron, taken from a traditional Brazilian whip, symbolizing striking power. Joe advanced the throttle, feeling the P-47 strain against its brakes. The engine's roar intensified, the vibration grew stronger, but the aircraft held together. He released the brakes and the 7-ton fighter began rolling down the runway. Acceleration was slower than usual, the troubled engine producing perhaps 90% of its rated power. Joe kept the stick neutral, watching his airspeed build. 50 knots, 60, 70. The tail wheel lifted off the ground. 80, 90. He pulled back gently on the stick, and the P-47 clawed its way into the Italian sky, climbing reluctantly into the afternoon air. Around him, 11 other P-47s from the squadron formed up, their engines sounding healthy and strong by comparison. Joe took his position in the formation, trying to ignore the nagging worry in his gut. The cylinder head temperature was still climbing, now approaching the red line. He adjusted the mixture, cracked the cowl flaps open wider, but the temperature stabilized only slightly below maximum. Jambok lead. This is Jambok 7, Joe called over the radio, using his tactical number. Engine. Running hot. Might need to abort. The response came from Major Rui Moreira, the squadron commander, a veteran pilot from Rio de Janeiro with 62 missions under his belt. Copy that, 7. Monitor your temps. If it gets worse, break off and return to base. No heroics today, Joe. Understood, lead. But even as he acknowledged, Joe knew he wouldn't turn back unless absolutely forced to. This mission mattered. Intelligence suggested the German fighters they were hunting belonged to an elite unit, possibly including aces with dozens of kills. Every enemy aircraft destroyed now meant fewer obstacles when the Allies finally pushed into Germany itself. And beyond the tactical considerations, there was something personal at stake. 3 weeks ago, during a mission over Bologna, Joe's wingman, a young pilot named Carlos from Belo Horizonte, had been shot down by a Messerschmitt Bf 109. Joe had watched helplessly as Carlos's P-47 spiraled down, trailing black smoke before exploding in a vineyard below. Carlos had been 22 years old, engaged to a girl back home, planning to open a restaurant after the war. His death had hit the squadron hard, and Joe in particular. The formation climbed to 18,000 feet, heading northeast toward the Po Valley. Below, the Italian countryside spread out like a patchwork quilt. Brown fields, green forests, silver rivers catching the afternoon sun. It looked peaceful from up here, belying the savage war being fought on the Io ground. Allied forces were pushing north against determined German resistance, every mile bought with blood. Joe scanned the sky continuously, his eyes moving in the systematic pattern he'd been taught. High, level, low, check 6, repeat. The sky was a pale blue scattered with thin clouds. Visibility was excellent, which cut both ways. They could see the enemy coming, but the enemy could see them too. Jambok lead, this is outpost. We have radar contact, multiple bogies bearing. 045, range 20 miles, Angels 22. The formation tensed. Bogies, unidentified aircraft. At 22,000 feet, higher than the Brazilians, altitude was energy, energy was life in a dogfight. The Germans had the advantage. Copy, outpost. Jambok flight, climb to Angels 20, stay sharp. The 12 P-47s nosed up, their engines roaring as they clawed for altitude. Joe's troubled engine protested immediately. The cylinder head temperature spiked into the red zone, and he felt a slight hesitation in the power delivery, a momentary stumble that made his heart skip. "Come on, girl," he muttered to his aircraft. "Stay with me." The altimeter wound upward, 19,000 feet. 19.5. The air grew thinner, colder. Juon's breath fogged slightly inside his oxygen mask. 20,000. The engine temperature remained in the red, but steady. 20,500. Jambok lead, tally-ho. 11 o'clock high. Looks like 109s. Juon's head. Snapped left and up. There. Dark specks against the blue, perhaps a dozen of them, maybe more. German Messerschmitt Bf 109 is the Luftwaffe's primary fighter, fast and deadly in the hands of experienced pilots. And these would be experienced. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe was critically short of fuel and aircraft. They only flew their best pilots now. Jambok flight. Drop tanks and engage. Watch your spacing. Stay in pairs. Juon hit the release for his external fuel tanks, feeling the aircraft lighten as they fell away. Around him, the formation began to spread out, shifting from a tight group to a looser combat formation. Each pilot had a wingman, someone to watch your back, someone you protected in return. Juon's wingman today was Lieutenant Paulo Costa, a pilot from Recife with a sardonic sense of humor and reflexes like a cat. Paulo's voice came over the radio, calm despite the circumstances. 7, this is 8. I've got your 6. Let's show these Germans how Brazilians fight. Copy 8. Stay close. The two formations rushed toward each other at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. The distance closed with terrifying speed. 3 miles. 2 miles. Juon could see the German fighters clearly now. Their angular shapes, the black crosses on their wings, the flash of sun on canopies. 1 mile. The sky exploded into chaos. The German formation dove on the Brazilians, trying to use their altitude advantage to make slashing attacks and zoom back to safety. But Major Moreira anticipated the move, turning the entire squadron into the attack, meeting the Germans head-on. It was a bold, aggressive move, exactly what the Germans didn't expect. Juon picked his target, a Bf 109 with yellow markings on the nose, indicating a veteran pilot. The two aircraft hurtled toward each other, guns beginning to flash. Tracers streaked through the air, bright lines of death. Juon waited, his finger on the trigger, the German growing larger in his gun sight. 500 yards, 400, 300. He pressed the trigger. The P-47's 850 caliber machine guns erupted, 4 in each wing, their combined firepower devastating. The aircraft shuddered from the recoil. Shell casings tumbled away in a glittering stream, but the German was firing too, and Juon saw strikes on his left wing, metal tearing, fabric ripping. 200 yards. Neither pilot broke. 100 yards. At the last possible second, both aircraft jinked, Juon rolling. Right, the German rolling left. They flashed past each other with maybe 20 feet of separation. Juon caught a glimpse of the German pilot, a face behind glass, eyes wide, mouth moving, shouting orders or prayers or curses. Then they were past, the sky whirling as both pilots pulled hard turns, trying to get on each other's tail. Part 2. The dogfight had become a three-dimensional chess match played at 300 miles per hour, where a single mistake meant death. Juon hauled the P-47 into a hard left turn, feeling the G-forces press him down into his seat, his vision beginning to narrow at the edges as blood drained from his head toward his feet. The Thunderbolt's controls grew heavy, the aircraft protesting the violent maneuver, but she responded. Behind him, the yellow-nosed Bf 109 turned inside his arc. The German fighter was lighter, more maneuverable. In a turning fight, the 109 had the advantage. Juon knew this from his training, from countless briefings, from hard experience. You didn't try to outturn a 109 in a Thunderbolt. You used your strengths, firepower, durability, and dive speed. 7. Brake right. Brake right. Paulo's urgent voice filled Juon's headset. Instinct took over. Juon reversed his turn, rolling right and pulling hard, just as tracer rounds sliced through the space where he'd been a heartbeat before. Another Bf 109 had joined the fight, trying to nail Juon while he'd been focused on the yellow-nosed fighter. Good call, 8. Juon gasped, the G-forces making it hard to breathe. Where are they? First one's on your 7 o'clock, second one braking high. I'm engaging the second. Juon's engine chose that moment to remind him of its troubles. The cylinder head temperature gauge had been buried in the red zone since the fight started, and now he felt a distinct roughness in the power delivery, one of the cylinders misfiring, perhaps damaged by the excessive heat. The engine stumbled, recovered, stumbled again. Not now, he thought desperately. Just hold together a little longer. The sky around him was filled with aircraft. Thunderbolts and Messerschmitts locked in individual duels, contrails marking their violent ballet. Radio chatter flooded his ears, a cacophony of warnings, target calls and desperate shouts. Jambuk 3 is hit, I'm losing hydraulics. 2 109s, 6 o'clock level, coming fast. Got one. That's a kill. He's going down. Juon forced himself to focus on his immediate threat, the yellow-nosed. 509, now positioned perfectly on his tail at about 500 yards. The German pilot was good, very good, maintaining perfect position, not firing yet, waiting to close the range where his lighter weapons would be more effective. Juon's mind raced through his options. He couldn't outturn the 109. He couldn't outrun it in level flight. But the Thunderbolt had one massive advantage. It could dive like a meteor and pull out where other fighters would tear themselves apart. Decision made. Juon chopped the throttle and deployed his dive brakes, using a technique he'd learned from an American pilot in training. The sudden deceleration was violent. He lurched forward against his straps, the aircraft shuddering. The yellow-nosed 109, caught by surprise, flashed past overhead, overshooting. Now the tables were turned. Juon retracted the brakes, shoved the throttle forward, and pulled up hard, trying to get onto the German's tail. The engine hesitated, that bad cylinder again, then caught with a surge of power. The temperature gauge climbed even higher. Juon ignored it. The Bf-109 pilot realized his mistake and broke hard left, vapor streaming from his wingtips as he pulled maximum Gs. But Juon had the angle now. He pulled lead, his gun sight tracking ahead of the German fighter, waiting for the right moment. There, he pressed the trigger. The 850s hammered out their deadly song. The stream of tracers arced through the air, and Juon walked them onto target with tiny corrections on the stick. 50 caliber rounds weighing nearly 2 ounces each, traveling at 3,000 feet per second, slammed into the Bf-109's left wing and fuselage. Metal exploded. Pieces of the German fighter tore away, tumbling through the slipstream. Juon saw strikes along the cockpit, the wing root, the engine cowling. Smoke erupted from the 109's engine, thick black smoke that meant catastrophic damage. The German fighter rolled inverted and dove away, trailing fire now, spiraling downward in an uncontrolled spin. Juon didn't follow. In combat, you never followed a damaged enemy down. That's when his wingman killed you. Besides, the 109 was finished. No one recovered from a spin like that with the engine on fire. Jambuk 7, splash 1, Juon called out, using the term for a confirmed kill. His hands were shaking slightly on the stick, adrenaline flooding his system. Good kill, 7, Paolo responded. But we've got company. 4 o'clock high, 3 more. Coming in. Juon looked right and up. 3 Bf-109s were diving on the fight, their pilots clearly hoping to surprise distracted Brazilian pilots. These weren't random encounters. The Germans were working together, using coordinated tactics. But Juon's fuel state was becoming a concern. The dogfight had consumed fuel at an alarming rate, and his engine's excessive consumption made matters worse. A quick glance at the gauge showed he was down to 40%, enough for maybe 15 more minutes of combat. Then he'd need to head home or risk flaming out over enemy territory. The 3 diving 109s split up, each selecting a different target. One of them, marked with white stripes on the tail, chose Juon. Here we go again, Juon thought. This time he didn't try to maneuver. Instead, he pointed the P-47's nose directly at the diving German, throttle wide open, accepting the head-on engagement. It was a calculated risk. The Thunderbolt's 8 guns against the 109's lighter armament, the Thunderbolt's radial engine and armored cockpit against the 109's liquid-cooled inline engine and thinner protection. The 2 fighters plunged toward each other. Gun cameras started recording, grainy black and white footage that would later be analyzed for confirmation of kills. Juon centered the German fighter in his gun sight, noting the white stripes, the black crosses, the propeller spinner painted in spirals. 600 yards, 500. Both pilots opened fire. The air between them became a lethal crossfire of tracers. Juon felt strikes on his aircraft. the distinctive hammer blow impacts of cannon shells and machine gun rounds hitting home. His right wing shuddered. Something shattered in the cockpit, an instrument exploding in a shower of glass. Wind suddenly roared through a hole in the canopy, where a round had punched through just inches from his head. But Joan's 8 guns were finding their mark too. He saw his tracers converging on the Bf-109, saw strikes rippling along the German's engine-cowling wing root's canopy. The 109's propeller exploded into fragments as a 50 caliber round struck the hub. The German fighter seemed to stagger in mid-air, its aerodynamics suddenly disrupted. 300 yards, 200. The German pilot tried to break off, rolling left, but his damaged aircraft responded sluggishly. Joan adjusted his aim and fired another burst. 2 seconds of concentrated fire from 8 heavy machine guns. More strikes. The 109's canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid or coolant streamed back, creating a white vapor trail. 100 yards. Joan pushed the stick forward, diving under the crippled German fighter. The 2 aircraft passed with maybe 50 feet of separation. Joan craned his neck to look back, saw the Bf-109 rolling over, nose dropping, beginning the long fall to earth. No parachute. The pilot was either dead or unconscious. "Splash 2, Joan called out, his voice hoarse. 7 has 2 confirmed. His engine chose that moment to make its displeasure known. The misfiring cylinder finally quit completely, and the power dropped noticeably. The cylinder head temperature gauge had been pegged at maximum for so long that Joan wondered if it was still accurate. Thick smoke began trailing from the cowling. Not the black smoke of fire, but the blue-white smoke of burning oil. The engine had maybe minutes left before it seized completely. "Jambox 7, this is 8. Your engine's smoking. You need to break off. Copy that, 8. But count the bandits first." Joan's eyes swept the sky, doing a rapid tactical assessment. The initial German formation of 12 had been reduced. He'd gotten 2, and he could see the smoke trails of at least 3 others going down, victims of his squadron mates. But the Germans hadn't given up. The remaining 109s were still fighting, still dangerous, and now they seemed to be concentrating their attacks on the thunderbolts that showed damage. Like his, 2 Bf-109s were angling toward him, their pilots no doubt seeing the smoke trail, sensing wounded prey. These weren't random attacks. They were deliberately targeting him, probably communicating in German over their radios, coordinating their approach. Joan's combat-trained mind went into overdrive, calculating angles, speeds, distances. His engine was dying. His aircraft had taken multiple hits. He was low on fuel. By any rational calculation, he should run, point the P-47 west toward Allied lines, and nurse it. Home before the engine quit completely. But 30 miles below, Allied soldiers were fighting and dying on the ground. Every German fighter that survived this engagement would strafe those soldiers tomorrow, bomb their positions, shoot down their supply planes. And on a more personal level, Joan thought of Carlos, his wingman, the 22-year-old kid who died 3 weeks ago. No more running. 8, I'm staying, Joan said simply. 7, don't be stupid. Your engine, I know, but I've got a couple kills left in her. Cover my 6. Joan, that's an order, Lieutenant. A moment of silence then. Copy 7. Let's make it count. The 2 German fighters came in from different angles. A classic pincer attack. One from above and ahead, one from below and behind. They were trying to force Joan into a position where no matter which way he maneuvered, one of them would have a shot. But Joan had been flying combat missions for 6 months. He'd survived 43 previous. Encounters through a combination of skill, luck, and an absolute refusal to do what the enemy expected. He waited until both Germans committed to their attacks, until they were locked into their approach vectors and firing. Then he did something insane. He rolled inverted and pulled. The P-47 flipped upside down, and Joan hauled back on the stick with all his strength, pulling the aircraft into a descending split S maneuver. The world rotated around him. Blue sky where the ground should be, brown. Earth where the sky had been. The G-forces were crushing, pushing him down into his seat with the force of multiple gravities. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, darkness creeping in at the edges. The 2 German fighters flashed past, their attack plan completely disrupted. Their bullets and cannon shells streaked through empty air where Joan had been seconds before. Joan completed the split S, now diving vertically, the damaged engine screaming in protest, the entire airframe shaking. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 15,000 feet, 14,000, 13,000. The ground rushed up with terrifying speed, but he'd achieved his goal. He was now behind and below the two surprised German pilots. With his last reserves of engine power, João pulled out of the dive, grunting against the G-forces, his vision blacking out momentarily. When it cleared, he had one of the Bf-109s perfectly framed in his gun sight, the German pilot apparently not realizing João had somehow ended up on his tail. João's finger found the trigger almost by instinct. The 8 guns fired, but not all of them. 2 had jammed from the violent maneuver, and a third was out of ammunition. But 5 guns was still enough. The reduced firepower meant João had to be more precise, but precision was something he'd learned through countless hours of practice. The 50 caliber rounds walked up the 109's fuselage from tail to cockpit. João saw the rudder disintegrate, the vertical stabilizer tear away. Strikes along the canopy and engine. The German fighter seemed to come apart in mid-air, pieces flying off in all directions. But João's damaged engine finally gave up. With a horrible grinding sound, the R-2800 seized. One moment, it was running rough, but running. The next, it locked solid, the propeller windmilling uselessly, no longer connected to power. The sudden silence was shocking. After the constant roar of the engine, the relative quiet was eerie, broken only by the whistle of wind over the canopy and the rattle of loose metal. "Seven's engine is dead," João transmitted, his voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. "Going to glide. Part 3. A P-47. Thunderbolt with a dead engine became a 7-ton glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a brick. João pushed the nose down to maintain airspeed. Too slow and he'd stall. Too fast and he'd burn through what little altitude he had. The aircraft was responding to his controls, but sluggishly, like a tired horse being asked for 1 more mile. He glanced at his instruments. Altitude 11,000 feet, airspeed 220 miles per hour. Oil pressure 0. Cylinder head temperature off the scale. Fuel enough to be a fire hazard if he crashed hard. Below him, the Italian countryside scrolled past, a mixture of Allied and German-held territory. The front lines were fluid, changing daily as the Allied advance pushed northward. Landing in the wrong area meant either death or a German POW camp. Neither appealing options. "Jambok 7, this is lead. We see you. What's your status?" Major Moreira's voice held forced calm, but João could hear the concern underneath. The squadron commander had already lost too many pilots, including 2 Brazilians shot down in the last month. "Engine seized, lead, looking for somewhere to put her down. Nearest Allied airfield is Pisa, bearing 27045 miles. Can you make it?" João did the mental math. 45 miles at his current. Glide ratio, it would be close, very close. But what choice did he have? "I'll try, lead, heading 270. Copy. Jambok 8, escort 7. Everyone else, let's finish these bastards." The remaining dogfight continued around him. P-47s and Bf-109s locked in their deadly dance. But João's war had changed. Now his enemy wasn't German fighters, but physics itself, the inexorable pull of gravity trying to drag his wounded aircraft down. Paulo's P-47 slid into formation beside him, and João could see his wingman's concerned face through the canopy. Paulo gave a thumbs up, trying to project confidence, but his eyes showed worry. João focused on flying. Every movement had to be precise. Too much bank angle, and he'd lose altitude faster. Too little, and he'd drift off course. The wind whistled through the bullet holes in his canopy, a constant reminder of how close death had come. The hole near his head was particularly unnerving. 6 inches to the left, and the German round would have taken his skull apart. The radio crackled with updates from the continuing fight. "Jambok 4, I'm hit, lost my rudder, can't shit, I'm spinning. Get out, 4. Bail out. Can't. Canopy's jammed, I can't get out." João listened helplessly as the pilot, a young man named Ricardo from Brasilia, fought to regain control of his damaged aircraft. The transmission ended with a burst of static. No parachute. Another name to add to the list of the fallen. "Jambok flight. This is lead. Bandits are breaking off. They're running." The Germans had had enough. They'd come into the fight with numerical advantage but had been hammered by the aggressive Brazilian tactics. João didn't know the final tally. That would come later, after the gun camera footage was analyzed. after intelligence collected reports from the ground, but he knew they'd hurt the Luftwaffe today. Small comfort to Ricardo and his family. 7. How's your glide looking? Paolo asked. João checked his altitude. 9,000 feet. He'd covered maybe 15 miles. Still 30 to go to Pisa. Tight, but possible if the math works. What can I do? Stay close. If I have to bail out, mark where I go down. You're not bailing out. You're going to make it. João appreciated the confidence even if he didn't share it. The P-47 was descending steadily, the altimeter unwinding in a slow spiral towards 0, 7,000 feet, 6,000. The ground details becoming clearer, individual trees, roads, buildings. Then he saw them. 4 Bf-109s flying in loose formation at about 4,000 feet, heading roughly north. Stragglers from the main fight, or perhaps a separate patrol. They hadn't spotted him yet. He was above them, and without his engine running, he wasn't producing the distinctive contrail or noise that made aircraft visible from miles away. 8. Do you see them? 4 o'clock low. Confirmed. 4 109s. A pause. 7. We should avoid them. You can't fight without an engine. João knew Paolo was right. The smart play was to glide past quietly, hope the Germans didn't look up, focus on reaching Allied lines, but he was still doing the math in his head, calculating angles and descent rates, and he realized something. 8. I'm not going to make Pisa. What, you've got the altitude? No, I don't. I'm losing height faster than the books say. Must be drag from the battle damage. I'll come up short by maybe 5 miles. Silence on the radio as Paolo absorbed this. 5 miles short of Allied lines meant landing in contested territory, possibly behind German positions. Okay, new plan, we find you a field you put down. I call in a rescue chopper. In 5 miles of territory the Germans still hold? I'll be captured before any rescue arrives. So what are you suggesting? João looked at the 4 German fighters below him, looked at his altimeter reading 5,000 feet, looked at the bullet-riddled cockpit and the seized engine, and the fuel gauge reading near empty. What he was considering was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. I'm suggesting we take out those 4 109s. Have you lost your mind? You don't have an engine, but I have gravity, and I'm directly above them, and they don't know I'm here. He could almost hear Paolo's mind working through the implications. You want to dive on them. Dead stick. 1 pass. We pick them off while they're not looking. Then you escort me to wherever I come down. And if you can't pull out of the dive? If the controls don't respond or the airframe breaks up, then I die doing something useful instead of being captured doing nothing. Another silence, longer this time. When Paolo spoke again, his voice carried a mixture of resignation and something else. Pride, maybe, or respect. Carlos would have loved this. Crazy Brazilian bastards until the end. Carlos was my friend. These Germans killed him. Time for payback. All right, I'm in. How do you want to play it? João's mind was already working through the geometry of the attack. I'll dive first, take the trailing 2. You come in from there 3 o'clock, hit the leaders. Speed will be our advantage. They won't have time to react. Copy. 7. For what it's worth, it's been an honor flying with you. We're not dead yet, 8. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, mark. João pushed the stick forward, and the P-47's nose dropped sharply. Without power, the descent was steeper than a normal dive, gravity pulling the 7-ton aircraft. Downward with increasing speed. The airspeed indicator began climbing. 250 miles per hour, 270, 300. The 4 Bf-109s grew larger in his windscreen, still unaware of the predator dropping on them from above. João could see details now, the camouflage patterns on their wings, the individual panels of their fuselages, even the heads of the pilots inside their cockpits. 350 miles per hour, 400. The controls grew heavy, the aircraft shaking from the speed. Pieces of damaged metal began tearing away from his wings, tumbling behind him in the slipstream. The whole airframe groaned under the stress. João selected his target, the left trailing 109. His thumb found the gun trigger, though he had no idea how many rounds remained in his 5 working guns. The guns had been firing on and off throughout the fight, and 50 caliber ammunition went fast. He might have 50 rounds left. He might have 5, 450 miles per hour. The dive was nearly vertical now, the ground filling his vision, The German fighters directly ahead, oblivious. 1,000 feet separation. 800. 600. The trailing German pilot finally noticed something, probably the shape of a P-47 appearing in his peripheral vision, or perhaps the whistling sound of Joan's dead stick dive. The 109 began to turn, the pilot's head swiveling, reacting too late. 400 feet. Joan fired. The 5 working guns hammered out their last reserves of ammunition. The tracers, every 5th round glowing bright red, streaked downward and converged on the Bf-109. With the tremendous closing speed of his dive, Joan's time on target was measured in fractions of a second, but it was enough. 50 caliber rounds tore into the German fighter's left wing and fuselage. Metal peeled away like paper. The wing folded upward, breaking at the root, and suddenly the Bf-109 was tumbling, not flying, pieces scattering across the sky. Joan had no time to celebrate. His airspeed was approaching 500 miles per hour, well beyond the P-47's rated maximum, and he was pointed almost straight down. He hauled back on the stick with both hands, every muscle straining, pulling with all his strength. The G-forces hit like a hammer. His vision went gray, then black, the blood draining from his head. He was conscious but blind, his body weighing hundreds of pounds, crushed into his seat. The aircraft groaned and shrieked, metal stressed beyond its design limits. Something snapped, a structural member giving way, and Joan felt the stick shift in his hands, the aircraft's aerodynamics subtly changing. Had he broken something critical? Was the wing about to fold? He couldn't see, couldn't know, could only hold the pull and pray the Thunderbolt lived up to its reputation for toughness. His vision returned in fragments, patches of sky, glimpses of horizon, the brown earth rotating around him. The altimeter was spinning downward, passing through 2,000 feet. The airspeed was bleeding off, but still dangerously high, 1,500 feet. Joan eased the pressure on the stick slightly, letting the nose come up more gradually. The G-forces relented, and his vision cleared fully. He was in a climbing turn, the aircraft shuddering and complaining, but still flying, 1,000 feet above the deck. He looked around frantically, trying to reorient himself. Where were the other 3 Germans? Where was Paolo? 8. Status. Right here, 7. Holy hell, that was insane. You got your target and I got one of mine. The other 2 were running. Joan spotted them. 2 Bf-109s heading north at full throttle, clearly wanting no part of whatever lunacy had just ambushed their flight. Paolo's P-47 was pulling around to chase them, but Joan transmitted quickly. 8, negative. Let them go. I'm out of altitude and out of airspeed. Need to find a field now. The brief climb from his pullout had consumed his last reserves of energy. The P-47 was once again descending, now at barely 200 miles per hour, mushing through the air more than flying. His altitude read 600 feet and dropping. Below, the Italian countryside spread out, a patchwork of farms, vineyards, small roads and scattered buildings. He needed something flat, long and soft enough not to kill him on impact. A plowed field would be ideal, though at his weight and speed, even that might be catastrophic. I see a field, 7. 11 o'clock. Looks like cropland, maybe half a mile long. Joan spotted it. A rectangular brown field, recently plowed, running roughly east-west. It wasn't perfect. There were trees at one end and what looked like a stone wall at the other, but it was the best option he was going to get. That's my target, 8. Stay high, watch for ground fire. If Germans are in the area, I don't want you getting shot down trying to protect me. Not leaving you. That's an order, Lieutenant. Courts-martial me later. Putting her down with you. Joan didn't have the altitude or time to argue. He was committed now, dropping through 400 feet, the field growing larger, details becoming clear. He could see the furrows in the plowed earth, the irregular surface, rocks and debris that could tear his landing gear apart. He reached down and grabbed the landing gear handle, pulling it to the extended position. Without hydraulic power or electrical power, both dependent on the engine, the gear would have to free fall into position, locked by gravity and mechanical backup systems. He felt the clunks as the wheels dropped, hoped they'd locked properly, but had no way to confirm. The gear indicator lights required electrical power he didn't have. 300 feet, 200. The field rushed up. Joan pulled back slightly on the stick, trying to bleed off speed, flaring for landing. But without power, he had limited control over his descent rate. He was coming in fast and steep. 100 feet. The landing gear hit the plowed earth hard. The right main gear collapsed immediately, either not properly locked or broken from battle damage, and the P-47 slewed violently to the right. The right wing tip dug into the soil, creating a massive spray of dirt and rocks. The aircraft spun, tail coming around completely out of control now. João was thrown against his straps, his head slamming into the side of the canopy despite his leather helmet. The world became a blur of motion, earth and sky and metal. The screeching sound of tearing metal was deafening. Something shattered, the canopy breaking apart. Dirt poured into the cockpit. The P-47 completed its violent ground loop and came to rest upside down, João hanging in his straps, dirt and aviation fuel dripping around him. The sudden silence was shocking after the chaos of the crash. For a moment, he just hung there, taking inventory. His head throbbed where it had hit the canopy. His shoulder ached from the straps, but he could move his fingers and toes. Nothing seemed broken. He was alive. Then he smelled the gasoline. Part 4. Panic cut through João's shock like a knife. Aviation fuel was pooling in the inverted cockpit, dripping from ruptured fuel lines, soaking into his flight suit. One spark, one ember from the overheated engine, and the entire aircraft would become a fireball. His hands moved automatically, trained by countless emergency drills. Release the oxygen mask. Unfasten the radio cord. Find the seat belt. Release. His fingers fumbled with the mechanism. It was sticky with fuel and dirt. Come on, come on. The release clicked. João dropped, crashing onto what had been the ceiling of the cockpit, now the floor. Pain shot through his already bruised shoulder, but he ignored it. He had seconds, maybe less. The canopy, or what remained of it, was partially buried in the plowed earth. João pushed against it, trying to create an opening large enough to crawl through. The broken plexiglass shifted slightly. Not enough. He braced his feet against the seat and shoved with all his strength. The canopy section gave way, and João squeezed through the gap, his flight suit tearing on jagged metal edges, fuel-soaked dirt caking his face and hands. He could hear fluid dripping, metal creaking as the wreckage settled, and somewhere in the distance the sound of Paulo's P-47 circling overhead. João scrambled away from the wreck on his hands and knees, then forced himself to his feet and ran. 20 yards. 30. 40. He threw himself down behind a low stone wall just as the P-47 caught fire. The initial flames were almost gentle, orange flickers dancing across the fuel-soaked metal. Then the fire reached the main fuel tanks. The explosion was massive, a boiling orange fireball that rose hundreds of feet into the air, throwing burning debris in all directions. Heat washed over João even behind his wall, and he pressed himself flat as pieces of his aircraft rained down across the field. When the immediate danger passed, João raised his head carefully. His P-47, his Centaur Pua, his trusted mount for 44 missions, was a scattered collection of burning wreckage. The tail section had been blown clear and lay smoking 50 yards away. One wing, remarkably intact, had landed upright, the Brazilian Air Force insignia still visible on its surface. 7, respond if you can hear me. Paulo's voice, frantic on the radio. João realized his radio was gone, destroyed in the crash, or left behind in the burning cockpit. He had no way to communicate with his wingman circling above. João pulled himself to his feet, grimacing at the various pains demanding attention. His shoulder, his head, his ribs. He waved his arms over his head, trying to signal Paulo that he was alive. The P-47 above waggled its wings in acknowledgement, and João saw Paulo point toward the northwest before banking in that direction. The message was clear. Allied lines are that way. Start walking. But before, João could take a step. He heard the sound of engines, not aircraft, but vehicles. Ground vehicles approaching fast from the east. His heart sank. The smoke from his crash would be visible for miles. Everyone in the area would know something had come down here, and this was still contested territory. João looked around desperately for somewhere to hide. The stone wall was too low. The field offered no cover. About 200 yards to the north, there was a line of trees, an orchard or woodlot. It was his only option. He started running, ignoring the protests from his battered body. Behind him, the engine sounds grew louder, multiple vehicles moving fast. He risked a glance back and saw them, 3 German military trucks, probably from a nearby garrison, racing toward the crash site. João reached the trees and dove into the undergrowth just as the lead truck skidded to a stop near the burning wreckage. He pressed himself flat behind a fallen log, trying to control his breathing, hoping the Germans would focus on the crash site and not search the surrounding area. Voices carried across the field, German voices, sharp and urgent. João didn't speak German, but he recognized the tone. They were probably trying to determine if the pilot had survived, searching for intelligence or prisoners. Through the branches he could see perhaps a dozen soldiers, some examining the wreckage, others fanning out in a search pattern. One soldier walked within 30 feet of João's hiding spot, his rifle held ready, eyes scanning the area. João remained absolutely still, barely breathing. The soldier paused, looking directly at the fallen log, and João's hand moved slowly to the service pistol on his hip, a Colt M1911, standard issue for American and Brazilian pilots. Drawing it would give away his position. But if he was discovered, he'd at least take one German with him. He wouldn't be captured without a fight. The soldier's gaze moved on. He shouted something to his companions and headed back toward the trucks. João allowed himself a small breath of relief, but he knew he wasn't safe yet. The Germans would almost certainly search the area more thoroughly once they'd secured the crash site. Minutes crawled past. João used the time to take stock of his situation. His flight suit was torn and filthy. His shoulder throbbed with what might be a separated joint. His head wound, from hitting the canopy, was bleeding sluggishly, matting his hair. He had his pistol with 2 spare magazines, giving him 21 rounds total. His survival vest contained a few basic items: water purification tablets, a compass, a first aid kit, chocolate bars, and a silk map of the region printed on a handkerchief. No radio. No way to call for help. His best chance was to move west under cover of darkness, reach Allied lines before the Germans found him. That meant hours of hiding, then a nighttime journey through enemy territory. If he was lucky, very lucky, he might make it. The sound. Our vehicles started again, but this time they were leaving. João risked a peek and saw the German trucks pulling away from the crash site, heading back east. They'd apparently decided no one could have survived that impact and explosion, or that searching further wasn't worth their time. João waited another 30 minutes, making sure they were truly gone, then carefully stood up. His legs were stiff, and the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him shaky and nauseated. But he was alive, free, and had a direction to travel. He checked his compass, oriented himself westward, and started walking. The Italian countryside in late afternoon was beautiful. Golden sunlight slanting through the trees, birds singing, the smell of earth and growing things. Under other circumstances, João might have appreciated it. Now it was just terrain to cross, obstacles to overcome, every shadow potentially hiding enemy soldiers. He moved carefully, using what cover he could find, avoiding roads and buildings. His training had covered escape and evasion, but the theoretical lessons were different from the reality of being alone in enemy territory, injured, with darkness still hours away. After perhaps 2 miles, João heard aircraft overhead. Allied aircraft this time, a formation of American B-25 bombers heading north, probably to hit German supply lines. He wanted to signal them, to somehow let them know he was down here, but he had no flares, no radio. They droned past, oblivious. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon. João's shoulder had stiffened to the point where he could barely move his right arm. The headache from his concussion was building, and he knew the symptoms of shock were setting in. Cold sweats, trembling hands, difficulty focusing his thoughts. He needed to rest, needed water, needed medical attention. But stopping meant risking capture. He pushed on. As twilight approached, João spotted a small farmhouse ahead, isolated, with no vehicles or obvious, military presence. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. He knew approaching was dangerous. The farm could be occupied by German sympathizers or even by German soldiers themselves. But he desperately needed information about where the front lines were, needed water, needed to know if it was safe to continue west. Decision made, João approached cautiously, circling the farmhouse to observe it from different angles. It appeared to be occupied by a single family. He could hear children's voices inside, and through a window, he saw an older woman cooking at a stove. He knocked on the door, his left hand resting on his holstered pistol. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, weathered face, work-worn hands, eyes that went wide at the sight of the battered, fuel-soaked pilot on his doorstep. "Per favore," João said, using one of the few Italian phrases he'd learned. "Aiuto, help." The man's eyes flickered to the Brazilian Air Force patch on João's torn flight suit, to the GI, service pistol, to the blood matting his hair. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the Italian stepped back and gestured João inside, speaking rapidly in Italian that João couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear. "Get in, quickly, before someone sees you." Inside, the farmhouse was warm and simple. Stone walls, rough-hewn furniture, the smell of cooking food. The older woman from the kitchen appeared, took one look at João, and began giving orders to her husband in rapid fire. Italian. Within minutes, João found himself sitting at a rough wooden table, while the woman cleaned his head wound with surprising gentleness. The man brought water, cool, clean water that João drank gratefully, and bread and cheese that tasted like the finest meal he'd ever eaten. They spoke no English, and João's Italian was limited to a handful of words, but somehow they communicated. Using gestures and the map from his survival vest, the farmer indicated that Allied lines were perhaps 8 kilometers west, close but still a dangerous journey in darkness. He also indicated German patrols moving through the area, searching for something, probably for João himself. The farmer's wife finished bandaging João's head and fashioned a sling for his injured shoulder. Then she pointed upward and spoke a stream of Italian. The farmer nodded and gestured for João to follow him up a narrow staircase. In the attic, hidden behind bags of grain, was a small space just large enough for a man to hide. The farmer indicated João should stay there until dark, then pointed west again, miming walking. João understood. Wait here safely, leave after dark, head west to Allied lines. He clasped the farmer's hand, trying to convey his gratitude with his eyes since words failed him. The man smiled slightly, said something in Italian that might have been good luck, and descended the ladder, pulling it up behind him to conceal the entrance. João settled into his hiding spot, his body finally able to rest. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The morning briefing that seemed a lifetime ago, the troubled engine that everyone said would fail, the dogfight, the kills, the dead stick dive, the crash, the escape. By all logic, he should be dead. The engine should have failed at a critical moment in combat. The Germans should have shot him down. The crash should have killed him. The fuel should have ignited while he was still trapped in the cockpit. The German soldiers should have found him. But here he was, alive, hidden, with a path to safety and Italians who risked their lives to help him. Tomorrow, if he made it back to Allied lines, there would be debriefings. Intelligence officers would want to know everything about the fight, the German tactics, their numbers, their aircraft markings. The gun camera footage from his aircraft was destroyed in the crash, but the other pilots would have their cameras, and those would tell the story. 8 kills in one mission, 5 in aerial. Combat during the initial engagement, 1 during the dead stick dive, and 2 more. The ones from his earlier sorties that day, that he'd barely had time to register. It was an extraordinary tally, possibly a record for a Brazilian pilot, maybe even for any pilot in the theater on a single mission. But João felt no pride in the numbers. He thought instead about Ricardo, whose jammed canopy had condemned him to ride his spinning aircraft all the way to the ground. He thought about Carlos, killed 3 weeks ago, who would never open that restaurant or marry his sweetheart. He thought about all the German pilots he'd shot down today, young men like himself, fighting for their country, now dead or captured or missing. War made everyone a killer or a corpse. There was no glory in it, no matter what the recruitment posters claimed. As darkness fell, João heard voices below, the family eating dinner, children laughing at something, normalcy continuing despite the war raging around them. The sounds were comforting, a reminder that life existed beyond combat and death. Hours passed. João dozed fitfully, his body's need for rest fighting against the pain from his injuries and the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Finally, around midnight, he heard movement below. The ladder was pushed up into the attic, and the farmer's weathered face appeared. It was time to go. The family had prepared a bundle for him, more bread and cheese, a bottle of water, a civilian jacket to cover his flight suit. The farmer led him outside, pointing west one more time, then pressed something into Joan's hand. A crucifix, old and worn, probably a family heirloom. Joan tried to refuse, it was too precious, but the farmer closed Joan's fingers around it and spoke firmly in Italian. Joan understood the meaning, if not the words. Take it. You need all the help you can get. They shook hands one final time, and then Joan was walking west into the darkness, alone again, but better equipped and with a clear direction. The night journey was a blur of careful movement, frequent stops to listen for patrols, using his compass and the stars to maintain his bearing. His shoulder throbbed with every step, and the headache had evolved into a constant, dull pressure. But he pushed on. Around 3 in the morning, Joan heard English being spoken. American voices, soldiers on patrol. He approached carefully, hands raised, calling out softly to identify himself before trigger-happy sentries could shoot him. The American corporal who challenged him was young, scared, and pointing a rifle at Joan's chest with hands that trembled slightly. Identify yourself. Captain João da Silva, Brazilian Air Force, 1st Fighter Squadron. Joan's voice was hoarse, exhausted, but clear. The corporal lowered his rifle slightly, confusion crossing his face. Brazilian? What the hell is a Brazilian doing out here? Long story, Corporal. Can we discuss it after you take me to your commanding officer? I have intelligence about German positions and recent air combat. The Americans did take him to their commanding officer, and then to a field hospital, and then to intelligence officers who spent hours debriefing him. The story of his mission spread quickly. The troubled engine, the multiple kills, the dead stick attack, the miraculous survival. By the time João was reunited with his squadron 2 days later, he'd become something of a legend. Major Moreira greeted him with a bear hug that made João's injured shoulder scream in protest. You crazy bastard. We thought you were dead. When Paulo reported you went down in enemy territory after that insane dive attack, how many did we lose? João asked, dreading the answer. Ricardo. Just Ricardo. Everyone else made it back, though Jambok 3 had to belly land with battle damage. Just Ricardo. As if one death was acceptable, tolerable. But João knew that in war, you measured victory by how many came home, not how many didn't. By that metric, they'd won decisively. What's the final tally from the mission? João asked. Moreira's smile was fierce. Gun camera analysis confirms 14 German aircraft destroyed, 3 probables, 2 damaged. We massacred them, João. The Luftwaffe unit we engaged was elite. The footage shows veteran markings on several of the kills, and you... He paused, his smile widening. You personally got 8 confirmed kills. 8 in one mission. That's 1 short of the squadron record for an entire tour. And you did it in 1 afternoon. 8. The number felt surreal. João thought about each engagement, each trigger pull, each enemy aircraft falling from the sky, 8 pilots who wouldn't go home to their families, 8 empty chairs at German mess halls, 8 sets of parents receiving telegrams. What about the engine? João asked. Have they recovered the wreckage? They have. And you'll love this. The technical team examined it, and they say that engine had no business flying at all, let alone through an extended combat mission. 3 cylinders had stress fractures, the oil system was nearly dry, and the whole thing was warped from overheating. The chief mechanic said it was the most abused R2800 he'd ever seen that didn't explode. Sergeant Miller and the other mechanics had been right all along. The engine was junk. It should have failed. By any reasonable prediction, it would have failed at the worst possible moment and killed João. But it hadn't. There's more, Moreira continued. The story's made it into the news back home. Brazil is going crazy. Brazilian pilot downs 8 Germans in single mission is the headline. You're a national hero, João. There's already talk of medals, maybe even a visit from the president when we rotate home. João barely heard him. He was thinking about Carlos and Ricardo, about the Italian family who risked everything to hide him, about the German pilots whose last sight had been the flash of his guns. Heroes. The word felt hollow. But as the days passed and João returned to flying, in a new P-47 with a brand new, reliable engine, he came to understand something. The story wasn't really about him or his kills, or even the miraculous survival. It was about what that troubled, condemned engine represented. The idea that even broken things could still function, could still fight, could still win against impossible odds. The war in Europe ended 6 weeks later. Germany surrendered, the guns fell silent, and pilots like João packed up to go home. The first fighter squadron had served with distinction, and Brazil had proven its military could stand shoulder to shoulder with any in the world. Years later, after João had returned to São Paulo, after he'd married and started a family, after the nightmares of combat had faded to occasional ghosts, people would still ask him about that mission, about the 8 kills, the dead stick dive, the crash and escape and survival. And João would tell them about the engine, the piece of salvaged junk that everyone said would fail, that should have failed, but somehow kept running long enough for him to complete his mission. He'd tell them that sometimes the things everyone dismisses as worthless turn out to be exactly what you need, that sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have, that sometimes the difference between failure and triumph is nothing more than refusing to quit when everyone expects you to. The crucifix the Italian farmer had, given him hung on João's wall for the rest of his life, a reminder that survival often depended on the kindness of strangers, on luck, on faith, and on engines that ran on willpower when their mechanics had given up. And whenever anyone mocked something as useless or broken or beyond repair, João would smile and tell them about a salvaged R2800 engine that helped a Brazilian pilot change history in the skies over Italy, one impossible flight at a time.